this is Perry Rarick, host of the Trailblazers and chief editor of Follow Your Buyer. Welcome to this special edition. When we started assembling the highlights from my interviews in 2024, we quickly realized we had far more insights that we wanted to share with you than we had room for in a single reel. So we created a Best of 2024 Part 2. We hope you enjoy it. And I also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow me on LinkedIn so you never miss an edition of the Trailblazers in 2025. Returning for a second Trailblazer guest appearance is Annie Dunleavy. She is the Executive Vice President and U.S. Head of Content Strategy for Edelman Business Marketing. Today with Annie, we're going to dive into the how-to aspects of using thought leadership content. So the first question, Annie, and this is the first thing that grabbed my attention when I was preparing for this, is the name of your approach to employing thought leadership content is the flywheel. And that harkens us back to an industrial age term, an innovation, but an industrial age term nonetheless. So why the flywheel? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in machinery, and I am not an expert on machinery, but a flywheel is a heavy wheel that rotates and stores energy and I guess sort of releases it as needed. And the momentum that builds up from the rotation of the wheel allows the wheel to keep itself going with sort of minimal additional energy. And that was the inspiration for the name of, the Edelman Thought Leadership Flywheel, because our framework is intended to work in much the same way. So it includes 6 best practices for creating successful thought leadership. And the idea is that if you do several of those pieces correctly and you do them well, each of those pieces creates momentum to sustain the program and continue to drive it forward.
I love it. I really love that term. And great explanation as well. So what are the 6 elements, the 6 disciplines within the flywheel?
So there are 6 elements of the flywheel, and I'll go through each of them. Number 1 is capitalize on white space. So making sure that when you're creating thought leadership, you're finding opportunities where your brand can own and lead timely conversations about what's going on in the space. That's number 1. Number 2 is be relevant. So understanding what your customers care about so you can create content that aligns with their interests and their challenges and what they're thinking. Number 3 is set a vision. So helping your customers see around corners, understanding where the industry is going, and helping them prepare for whatever may be sort of coming down the pike in their industry or for their business. Number 4 is earn trust. So you always want to be a credible source of information and gain and maintain the trust of your readers and your customers and your stakeholders, whoever you're trying to reach. Number 5 is be concise. So people are busy, professionals are busy, time is of the essence. So making sure you're delivering your content with impact and getting the hard-hitting takeaways to them sort of as efficiently and engagingly as possible. And number 6, measure progress. And this is such an important one because if you want to demonstrate the value of your program kind of within your organization, up the chain to company leadership, you need to be able to properly measure its impact. So measurement is really a critical component of this.
Returning for a second Trailblazer appearance is Heather Nielsen-Shagru. She is a highly accomplished sales and marketing executive in a most challenging space, B2B life sciences. Well, the last time we met, you offered some really great, highly valuable insights on the challenging conditions that cell and gene therapy innovators, the drug sponsors, face. Pressures from investors who have placed a lot of stock in their success, frequent and numerous M&As, still developing scientific know-how, and this fragmented landscape of capabilities across a growing number of contract development and manufacturing organizations that are all being relied on heavily to help advance innovative ideas through development and on to commercial production. And I think we concluded that this is a really daunting set of conditions that would make most human beings turn and run. However, you're leaning right into this. This is the world you live in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I'd like you to, if I can ask you to just summarize those conditions like you so aptly do. And has anything changed since we last spoke?
So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'll say kind of tongue in cheek, has anything changed in the last 2 weeks? There's probably another couple CDMOs that have just started up, would be my guess, in the cell and gene therapy space. And you kind of summarized really our conversation quite well just now, Perry. But really, from my perspective, getting involved in cell and gene, really knowing that I wanted to do this back in 21, as I highlighted in our last conversation, you look at the growth and the history of cell and gene, and it's been around, for 40 years. But the first thing I really noticed, and I mentioned this last time, was just the infancy of the industry itself. There's still a lot that's yet to be discovered, and so we're kind of stuck in this place of how do we scale, how do we get better potency, how do we get better yield to really go towards some of these higher indications that can be really lucrative and helpful for a larger number of people.
This takes a special type of person because I think most people would say, "My gosh, where's the business in this? Who would volunteer to get involved in this?" You always remind me about the patient, though. Every time we talk, you talk about the patient, and I think that's what makes it worthwhile.
Absolutely. Absolutely, always has been for me in drug development in particular, but when you talk about cell and gene therapy, you said it earlier, you're curing and not just treating, and that is magic. I mean, really, it's unbelievable, and the industry has come so far, and we're getting closer to being able to, be very impactful to a larger number of people in that space. But that's why it's so important that these CDMOs work and work well to be able to support the sponsors who are developing these drugs to try to get them to market.
Over the discussions we've had, that's one thing I've recognized in you is you operate with a high level of empathy, whether it's for the people you work with closely, that you've worked with clients, CDMOs, with patients. You have this high level of empathy, and you shared with me some of the conversations you've had with clients when, from a CDMO perspective, and how these drug sponsors are feeling. I think you talked about, you threw out some terms of confusion, a little uncertainty. Can you share that set of insights with our listeners?
Absolutely, and I think the word I used last time was terrified. Because the growth of number of CDMOs that are out there. And I was thinking about this a little bit more since our last conversation, and I kind of have now bucketed them into two different categories when you talk about sponsors who are looking for support. Those companies who have been here for 40 years, are very focused on cell and gene therapy, very well versed, understand the technology, and are trying to drive innovative, medicines to cure patients, had been working with these smaller CDMOs. And as you started seeing this momentum that we just talked about with larger CDMOs wanting to get those modalities under their umbrella, it sort of breaks that momentum a little bit about how that company works. Smaller companies work very more closely together than larger companies. I mean, that's just kind of common sense of how it works. And so these clients who had been engaging with some of these smaller CDMOs now all of a sudden have to rethink their approach because they're not working with the same company they were working with before. There may be same scientists there, but it's not under the same umbrella of an organization. So two things: you either follow your scientists who you become very well connected with and they know your technology and they know what they're doing and being able to help support your gene therapy or your cell therapy program, or you stay with a company that was acquired and you try to make it work, but you've got to rethink how you engage with that CDMO because it's a whole different way of doing it when you're talking to a larger CDMO versus a smaller one. So there's those clients that are a kind of there are those clients that are kind of running into those types of challenges. And then you've just got new people who are getting into cell and gene therapy who may not have the background and expertise, but are interested in it, want to get involved in it, get excited about it, are passionate about it as well, but may not have the level of understanding or depth of knowledge. So they look to CDMOs to help support from a scientific perspective as well. Similar challenge, though, is how do you gauge that? How do you, what kind of questions do you ask to make sure that they're firmly aware and have the technical expertise to help support your programs? And when you talk about the dilution of the technology and of the know-how that's out there, that could become a problem because somebody might, be in a position to help support, but might not have, all of the background to help support for longer term. Or another statistic I think I threw out last time when we spoke was a lot of the people who have come into the cell and gene therapy, 90% of those are from biologics. And again, biologics is close to, but not exactly cell therapy or gene therapy.
My Trailblazer guest today is Alex Halstead. He's the Director of Business Development for Life Sciences at Hobson Associates. They are an executive recruiting firm that fosters personal and strategic relationships and partnerships with their clients. The recruiting industry is tough and a little mysterious at times, and the challenges of the life sciences industry make it exponentially harder. And this is Alex's specialty. Okay, so there's a lot of key stakeholders in the life sciences space. You have drug sponsors, the innovators, the scientific innovators. Oftentimes they're small, or they need some help from contract development and manufacturing organizations. There's a lot of VC. There's a lot of investment industry interest in this. A lot of private equity being infused, and it's needed, but it's also could be a little disruptive. It's a different type of organization. And this creates, when we spoke earlier, this creates some really interesting challenges that you have to navigate. So let's jump into that. Why don't you start speaking a little bit about that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I mean, just like any other industry, you need cash and you need investment to move things forward. There's a lot of companies out there with a guy in a lab with a molecule that has an idea, and it could be a great idea, but you need money and you need money to be able to progress that forward. So with those, with the private equity and the venture capital firms that are putting the money in there, when interest rates were quite low, the cash flow was quite quickly, and that's where you saw the influx of these companies and a lot of innovation happening within the last 4 years. With that model, though, comes some challenges when some things when the money starts to tighten up, a little bit of the innovation can get dried up a little bit. So one of the main factors is when you're working with a lot of these contract services companies, the CROs, the CDMOs, who, they're helping these biotechs develop their drugs, get them through phase 1, get them through phase 2, do those things. A lot of these companies are heavily invested by these private equity and venture capital firms. I would say around 90% of the CDMOs and CROs across the globe have some sort of private backing to them. So with that, and within the private equity space, you're going to want to see a return on your investment just like any other industry. So that's why you see a little bit of the turnover with these companies pretty much every 3 to 7 years with a change of ownership, because these people want to see return on their investment. They understand what the EBITDA needs to be. They understand what the back end needs to be. They want to see the revenue. They want to see the cash flow, and they want to see that return. So in an industry where there's constant change, there's constant innovation, there's constant things happening, there's going to be turnover and there's going to be change in hands of ownership, which could scare a lot of people, but it also can excite a lot of people, especially in a scientific field where innovation is so key.
Something you said is worth a pause, and 90% is 90% of the industry, or 90% of the companies are impacted by private equity.
Yes, yes, I would absolutely say that that's the truth. That there's very, very few family-run contract services firms across the globe. I believe there's only one left in the United States alone.
Wow. So this isn't a problem this isn't a challenge that's sitting on the sidelines. This is front and center for most of this space.
I would say absolutely. Yeah, I would say absolutely. It's front and center with the space, and you can see it when you're talking to people. there's a level of I need to grow the business by X by the next 4 years because we're going to sell and we're going to have another group come in, which you'll see a lot of churn at the top at that point as well too, because a lot of these private groups have people that they trust that they have done it with in the past. So you'll see this kind of the same people move around to a bunch of different companies, and not many people understand why those people are moving with those companies. But if you look on the back end on the investment side of it, you'll understand why is the money people trust this leadership to move from 2x to 5x to 7x to upwards of 50x, what you were seeing in 2021, 2022 with some of these investments.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, it really explains. For years, I've been hearing from people working in the industry that, and they've labeled the CDMOs as the folks turn over all the time. No one stays in the CDMO very long. So I think you're explaining why.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, having some of the turnover, because you start to get different ideas in different places. And that's really where you push the innovation forward, is taking somebody's good idea, pairing it with somebody else's good idea, and then making it a better idea, which is why I exist, because I get to introduce those people to each other.
My guest today is Vasudha Kandaparkar. She's a highly skilled data professional with extensive experience in data and analytics strategy across a number of industry sectors, including retail, finance, marketing, and hospitality. So I'm guessing I'm going back into my memory. About 15 years ago, I was at a biopharmaceutical trade show in the United States on the West Coast. It was the last day of the event, and I ran into a gentleman who was a recruiter, an HR recruiter, representing one of his clients in a biopharmaceutical company. And he was looking for somebody who had dual degrees and experience in biology and computer science. And he was very unhappy because he hadn't found anybody. He was very low on this final day of the show, and he described the need that this biopharmaceutical client that he had was sitting on what he referred to as big data, and he waved his arms. Big data. He said they needed to organize it, sort it, protect it, and then use it to try to make better decisions. And something tells me we have come a long way since then. So I thought it might be helpful if we could start out. You've been at the ground floor of all of this. Could you just give us a history lesson about data analytics and what it is and what are we doing today with it?
I think firstly the challenges that you mentioned that your colleague has in terms of, the data has been collected, but you still need to make sense of it. There's no point in having a whole library if you're not going to read the books, and this is very much the same. You've got all of this information. If you're not going to use it, how how does that drive you any value? But what's interesting is you had this conversation 15 years ago, but for me, data analytics in its true form, where it really sort of hit it big almost, I'd say would be around sort of the Second World War, where we really got out of the theoretical zone into application. There's still theories, there are scenarios that are written about that time period, which are still used. I still use them today. And I think the most common example, everyone's heard of the code breakers at Bletchley Park. But I think for me, the one example that stuck out was something that, an American mathematician called Abraham Wald did. And he was looking at the damage patterns on aircraft that came back. So these are the ones that were actually, that went into the war zones, had all the, engaged and then came back. And obviously they lost some planes along the way as well. So the operations people were trying to figure out what they needed to do to make sure that they could get more of their aircrafts and people back. And they kept looking at the damage patterns on the planes that came back, and they kept reinforcing the damaged areas. Wald comes in and he says, hang on, this is the damage, but these planes came back. What about the ones that didn't come back? What about the areas where this plane doesn't have damage? Maybe this one came back because, the areas that are already reinforced were the only ones that got attacked. The rest of them are perfectly fine. And that's when they kind of switched gears and they started reinforcing the areas that didn't have any damage in the aircraft that came back. And they had a significant change in terms of their efficiency and their effectiveness. And for me, that kind of captures what data is about. They have the data and they didn't have some of the data, but then they were able to kind of put the two together and sort it out in a manner that allowed them to make a decision that eventually helped them, win the war. And I think for me that kind of captures the spirit of what everybody's trying to do with data, which is you've got the information in front of you. How do you make sense of it? How do you put other things into the equation and then make sure that what you bring out of it is something that you can actually use?
My Trailblazer guest today is Jennifer Kingsley. She is the Chief Commercial Officer at Vinta Bio. They are a contract development and manufacturing organization serving in one of the most fascinating industries and markets. And that's bringing cell and gene therapies from discovery through commercial manufacturing. She's not only a trailblazer, but Vinta Bio is a trailblazing company in a trailblazing industry. And it doesn't get much harder. They are not just treating symptoms, but they're curing diseases. Jennifer, welcome to the Trailblazers.
Thanks, Perry. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
All right, Jennifer, many in our audience are not familiar with cell and gene therapies, even though they may work in the pharmaceutical industry. So can you explain what cell and gene therapies are and why is it such a big deal?
Yeah, so I have to answer this question. I want to take a little bit of a time machine and go back to when I was starting my career, um, up to 30 years ago. And that was in the time frame where all of the rage and the talk was about sequencing the genome and all the promise that that held for the medical community. Craig Venter was having his moment in time, very provocatively out there in the media talking about sequencing the genome, and it was like science fiction, right? And so now you fast forward 25, 30 years, and this is what's actually going on in the reality today in science. And it's really exciting. And it's really exciting to be part of the process and see it come full circle. So, Perry, the uniqueness in this therapeutic area is really that it's a cell going back into a patient to become part of the immune system, or in the case of what we do at Vinta Bio, it's actually looking at how do you deliver a gene. So a gene that has a mutation, and you're able to fix the mutation and then deliver it into the body for the therapeutic cure, which is why this is so unique and partly why it's also challenging to the developers as well, because there's always the risk of an immune response. Some of the challenges back in I think it was the 80s or the 90s with the original gene therapies were an immune response, but so much of an immune response that it actually caused some patient deaths. And so this is a unique kind of almost a relaunch of gene therapies currently right now, having learned from all of the different things that they did over the course of about 2 decades in the industry. So it's such an exciting and promising field, and it's for me, it's been really wonderful to see it come full circle, and it's a little bit where science and science fiction meet for me.
Oh, I love that. Science and science fiction. And this is curing diseases. We're eradicating disease in certain
Absolutely.
cases.
Yeah, in certain cases, I think in some cases people need multiple treatments over the course of maybe their life, but you can literally go in and when I was studying biology as an undergraduate, I just remember remarking actually to one of my professors how amazing it was that just the littlest mutation in one gene could just completely change somebody's course of life, and they could have a very, very debilitating disease, sometimes often led to early premature death. I mean, it's just amazing what one little mutation can do. And so this type of therapy is amazing because it basically comes and delivers the corrected piece of DNA into the person's body and lets their body kind of incorporate that back into their genome and literally fix the disease and fix the disease state. And that might be a little bit of an oversimplification. A clinician or doctor could probably go into a little bit more detail, but at a very high level, that's basically what we're doing when we're working with gene therapies.
Incredible. So without divorcing ourselves entirely from the science, we're going to shift a little more to the business landscape.
Okay.
So CDMOs and drug sponsors and those complex relationships aren't new, but certainly CDMOs that participate in the cell and gene space are kind of new. So can you just tell us what's going on and of course, against the backdrop of we can't let go of COVID and all the
Right.
disruption there. So what's that landscape look like?
Yeah, so this is I can't underestimate how much this is still a new frontier in medicine, and it's really in its early stages. And what you see from a development standpoint is, there's thousands of molecules in the cell and gene therapy space that are being worked on in various stages of clinical development, from preclinical all the way through. But I think right now, currently, at the end of the day, we only have about 5 drugs that are commercially available to patients. We have a lot of things in the clinics. We have a lot of things in the very early stages of the clinic. I think it's something like 90% of the molecules that are being developed today, 90% of those things are in the very earliest stages. So they're right out of the discovery R&D labs, and maybe in the very early stages, maybe having just planning on coming and, doing a phase 1 clinical trial, which is the first time something sees an actual human in the clinical development cycle. Um, and so where we see the development coming from is really in the academic space. And really, if you take a step back and you think about the development of drugs across the board, a lot of the big blockbuster drugs that we have today that are biologic drugs actually did originate in an academic institution somewhere. And so that model hasn't changed much. A lot of the innovation is actually happening in the academic space. Sometimes those academic labs will spin out a small biotech. Sometimes the biotech will start and they'll tech transfer a technology in, or maybe they happen to have, maybe the inventor of the therapy is in that and starts a biotech company. But my end point is really that a lot of that innovation is being done out of the translational academic type of labs or in a small biotech. And so what you find is that those companies or entities don't necessarily have the resources that a large pharmaceutical company would have. And so they need to outsource. And so they reach out to organizations like Vinta Bio to help them develop their drug, understand how to make it for the clinical patient from a quality perspective and a regulatory perspective. And they really can reach out as an extension of their organization to partner with a CMO and CDMO to help get them into the clinic and ultimately into patients. And
He is Nicholas Reed, author of Selling to the C-Suite and Target Opportunity Selling. Nick has a background in research, which he applied to demystify what really works and doesn't work in B2B selling. A former principal at Ernst & Young, Nick was awarded the Gold Stevie Award for his contributions to selling. To date, he has helped his clients find and win more than $50 billion in additional sales. Welcome, Nick, and thank you for joining us today.
What an intro. Who is
Well,
that guy?
You're a big personality and it deserves a big intro. So I have to tell you, selling to the C-suite, I think the first question I'll ask is, tell us a little bit about selling to the C-suite. It was first published in 2009. I think that's about when I first read it. I still have it. This is my copy. It's a little beat up. It's got a lot of little notes inside and many more written on the pages. It didn't just go on the shelf. I still access it and reference it regularly. And it was instrumental in changing the parent company of Follow Your Buyers, Life Science Connect. We revolutionized, completely changed our selling process, making it much more consultative with a big understanding of our clients. So thank you for helping us.
Oh, it's great. It's absolutely great to hear that. Yeah, I love it when we hear that the work that we put in is making real world differences to people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All right. So I've got to say, there are tons of books out there, tons of books, blogs, websites, video presentations, death by PowerPoint. All of those exist. They all promise to help B2B salespeople and sales organizations sell better, faster, bigger contracts, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
most of them are really based on someone's opinion on the sales side of that very complex relationship between buyer and seller. So, what differentiates your book is it's grounded in research, which I really love. Of course, that's a big part of your introduction. You consider yourself a researcher. So, why did you write the book? But maybe appropriately, why did you pursue this research on understanding how buyers make purchasing decisions? Were you seeing something that troubled you at the time? But maybe you can just tell that story a bit.
This is a great question. Yeah. I mean, at the time, there was very little out there from the buyer side. As you say, there were so many death by PowerPoints and blogs and videos and everything, but all of these were written by people saying, look, here's how I did it in my day, in my career as a salesperson. It'll work for you too. And of course, it doesn't always happen that way. And almost none of it was based on any real research. I mean, when we started the research, it predated anyone talking about the customer journey, which is now everywhere. But in most cases, you see that it's still just a sales cycle dressed up to sound customer focused, but it wasn't really focused on how executives buy or what executives look for from salespeople. So, I remember going to a national sales conference in Atlanta. I guess this was around 2005. And the keynote speaker proudly announced that this next year was going to be the year of the customer. And I thought, does that mean that this year wasn't? What about the year before? What about the year after? And I thought, shouldn't customers be at the center of what we do all the time? So in those days, selling was very much seen as a find, pitch, close, formula. There's a questioning model over there. There's objection handling over here. There's some objection, closing techniques that you can use. And there was a few codified processes around. But again, it was all kind of, I don't know, best intentions, but somewhat amateurish. So it was just also sales centric and somewhat manipulative, kind of a toxic salesuality, if we can call it that. And it might have suited transactional selling, but it certainly was not suiting the emergence of what we saw as complex enterprise selling, where it's not just turn up, meet a person once, pitch and close. It was turn up, develop a relationship with multiple people from your organization, multiple people from the buyer's side, including the executives, and develop a relationship that actually meant something. And so we weren't seeing much at the time that was built for that. Certainly not the level of relationship and credibility that you need in the life sciences and other complex industries. So, while all of that was going on, Perry, nobody had stopped to ask the executive buyers what they actually look for from sales teams. There's some really fundamental assumptions that everybody had. When we don't have an open dialogue with people, we kind of guess what they're all about and what they think, but it makes it all a little bit mysterious. And we wanted to demystify all of that. Some of the commonly accepted knowledge at the time was executives really don't like meeting with salespeople. Turned out not to be true. It takes months to become a trusted advisor. Also turned out not to be true. You've heard this, right? Everyone knows these things to be true, except that those things aren't true, not at all. And when we started talking to executive buyers, a very different reality started to appear. So first, executives, they love talking to salespeople as long as you've done your homework and you bring new value. After all, you're selling to all of their competitors, right? So you get to see things in their own industry that they don't hear about at trade conferences or the magazines that they read. So good salespeople who know where the market's going next and what value looks like, they make it their mission to give executives various options that they might not have known about before, and they're worth their weight in commission checks. And executives rely on this because they're not out there, but you as a salesperson are. So that was one of the first, I guess, myth busters that we found. Second, you can become a trusted advisor in the very first call if you surprise them with insight, or even better, with foresight, right? So if you can tell them what's coming around the next corner, what other people are adapting to, what you don't see them doing that they might want to consider, that's valuable to the executive. If you've seen efficiencies that their competitors have already ironed out using your solutions or even other options in the marketplace that might affect their supply chain, their manufacturing process, that's valuable to them. If there's new time and cost savings that technology can mean for them, or higher value work that could get assigned to their high paid staff that can be offloaded to technology, automation, other processes, that's valuable to them.